What are the strangest things you've overheard while chauffeuring the rich? Billy Bob Thornton was doing radio press for a movie about to come out, meaning he had to stop by 6 or 7 radio stations for interviews. He wanted to have a cigarette in the vehicle on the way to the next interview, but I had to let him know that our company has a no-smoking policy in our vehicles. He asked me to call the owner to make an exception, but the owner said no, and it's a $250 cleaning fee if he smoked in the vehicle. He asked to stop by a bank. Came out and handed me $5,000 in cash and said, "Here's for the whole goddamn pack." He smoked in the car for the rest of the trip. Later, I got up the nerve to ask him if that's the most expensive pack of cigarettes he'd ever smoked. All he said was, "Not even close." Never explained it further. I think about him often. Picked up a wedding party. Bride, bridesmaid, and bride's boyfriend who was paying for the wedding. They had a magnum of champagne and we drove around for quite some time while they snorted white snow in the back. They were using rolled-up 50s and 20s, then tossing them to me in the front seat as tip money. I dutifully brushed off each bill and added them to my wallet, pretending not to know what was going on. The couple argued off and on about showing up to the wedding. Apparently, she felt weird about getting married and he was trying to convince her it was a good idea. Finally dropped them off at the church and he slipped me a matchbook with his name and number written on it. Yeah, it was the late 80s and I was a young woman, one of the only female limo drivers at the time in that city. I scored a sweet leather jacket with the tips from that night. So many weird stories. And to clarify, the bride's boyfriend and the groom were not the same person. A chauffeur I knew ended up driving around some big stars. He was a big guy, like 6'8" and super muscular. His best story was when he was driving around a few WWE, or WWF back then, stars, and they awkwardly asked him not to get out and open the door for them because he'd make them look smaller. I'd totally believe this. The WWE had an on-air personality named Tom Phillips that was like 6 foot. In order to make the wrestlers seem bigger when he was interviewing them, they always had him sitting down, or if they were standing, they were framed from the waist up to hide the fact that Tom was standing with his feet spread out. And this is why the narrator only goes out to the clubs with a squad of short kings. I'm going to digress slightly from the topic to bring up another story that was written to us, not about people in limos, but their close cousins, people who go to country clubs. I once worked at a really exclusive club in Massachusetts, the kind you have to be born into or have generational wealth to be voted into membership by the board. Drew Barrymore was a frequent guest and there was always a lot of tension between her and her ex, who always came with his extremely young new girlfriend and wife. She wasn't super friendly, no one was supposed to acknowledge they recognized her, and seemed constantly stressed. I felt kind of bad for her. Didn't seem like a fun life. Mitt Romney, Morgan Freeman, and a bunch of big-time athletes were also frequent guests. Someone got married at our club and spent over $2 million on the wedding. They flew out the event planners for Coachella to design every aspect of the wedding. It was a spectacular one and one of the most fun nights I've ever had. However, at the end of the night, the front desk saw the groom go home with one of the bridesmaids instead of the bride. I helped set up and cater this one member's garden party, a casual affair for them that must have cost tens of thousands. They had a well-known music group come play for their guests, and I got to play cornhole with said group during the luncheon, which was pretty cool. So many wealthy kids with rich kid problems and wildly different upbringings. Parents would constantly talk and quiz their kids on politics, history, science, among other things. One group of guys was challenging their teenage sons to come up with a business idea. The boy with the best idea would receive $1 million for startup costs. Kids talked stocks constantly at the dinner table. Teenagers would come to eat with their friends, drink, and drop a casual $15,000 bill on their parents' tab. Just such a stark contrast from the way I was raised, where money was a taboo topic and my weekly $2 allowance for a week's worth of chores made me feel rich. It was a small island with an equally small nightlife, so for fun we'd grab a drink and an ice cream cone and hop on the yachts and sailboats parked at the docks. We'd just explore and pretend we were sailors or captains for the night. Once we hopped on Johnny Depp's super yacht while he was out for dinner. We actually managed to hang out for a hot minute before security finally kicked us off. While out looking for a tennis partner, I met this truly lovely couple who basically adopted me. I would bike to their house to play matches on their backyard tennis court every day. They loved to take me out to eat at these incredible restaurants. As a foodie, I was in heaven. They let me drive their cars on the beach, use their surfboards, drive their jet ski. I ran out of gas in the middle of the ocean and I had to get rescued by the Coast Guard, and they took me out on their yacht and even flew me out on their private jet to nearby islands to explore in the morning, and then would fly me back in time for my job at the club. They were the most kind and wonderful people, and never asked for anything but my company in return. I think they missed their daughters, who both lived out of state. I fell out of touch with them, but I think of them often, and I hope they're doing well. A friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osmond. Fairly simple gig, go to the airport and pick up Marie Osmond, who was to be the featured entertainer at a private event. The plane comes in, he meets her, and she has a carry-on bag, but her checked suitcase containing her stage dresses and makeup was missing. She was unflappable though, asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects 2 long sequined cocktail dresses, and goes to the fitting room to try them out, without him of course. Unfortunately, there are 2 entrances and exits to the fitting room, and Marie Osmond exits out through the other side and can't find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the side she'd entered. 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong, so he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osmond. The manager thinks she's being pranked and declines. Chauffeur buddy is in mini panic mode, running wildly around the store, asking random customers, "Have you seen Marie Osmond? Have you seen Marie Osmond?" Store security is summoned and he's asked to leave the premises right now. He calls his employer and tells him he has lost Marie Osmond. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number but has her agent's number and he is not accepting calls. She, in the meantime, has taken a cab to the gig, thinking she's been forgotten. Lots of apologies eventually ensued and there were no repercussions. When we were in high school, my friend used to caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he'd be willing to drive him around while he went out partying. This was like 2003 and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 p.m. Right off the bat, the guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit and my friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him like another $200 and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of white snow. They went to another bar, he handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple of hours later with a girl, he was married with kids by the way, and handed my friend another $200 and they went back to her house. After they'd done the deed, he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. At this point, it was like 2 or 3 a.m. My friend said the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water up to his ankles, in his shoes, and threw a bunch of rocks into the water and then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car, he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. None of us really believed my friend when this happened until the guy he drove got arrested for a violent outburst and possession of white snow about 6 months later. You know, as weird and haunting as this event was, $1,300 for a day's work is something that I would literally have brought a new car in order to do when I was in university. A buddy of mine ended up picking up a Netflix producer while doing Uber. He said they had a great conversation as he brought him to his hotel. The producer invited him up for a drink, and since my friend was a film student, he thought it'd be a good idea to try and get some good networking in. They hung out for about an hour when he asked my friend if he knew of any massage places with happy endings. He didn't, but the guy paid him $500 to bring him to the closest massage place, which was only a few miles out. Upon dropping him off, he gave my buddy a card and said, "There's a big party and festival I'm hosting. That's your ticket in. I'll let you know if I get that happy ending." He got that happy ending. Not a chauffeur, but this happened because of a lack of one. Basically, a guy I used to know back when we were teenagers, 17 years old, had a lot of money. We just never knew how much until I was invited to go on holiday with him and some other friends. All expenses paid, of course. Anyway, we took a taxi to an area where this guy wanted to buy an apartment and wanted to show us, so we went with him and ended up spending the whole day walking around the area. We got tired and eventually wanted to go back to the house, but we were so far away that walking was not an option unless we wanted to walk for about 3 hours. Neither of us had enough cash to pay for a taxi, and back then taxis didn't accept cards. This was around 2000 or 2001. So this guy rings his dad and asks if he could send a chauffeur to pick us up, but the chauffeur turns out was busy doing some deliveries for the dad. So the dad instead says, "There's a Mercedes-Benz dealer's shop near where you are. I know the manager there as I brought several cars from them. Just go and buy a car with the credit card. You can leave it in the house and we'll figure out how to bring it home later." So we went to this dealer shop and somehow in about 30 minutes the manager did all the paperwork and we ended up driving back to the house in a brand new Mercedes C-Class, which we used for the rest of the holiday. Mine isn't something that was overheard, but something that happened. At least I hope nobody could hear it. A friend of mine who worked in music was in a limo with Robin Thicke and a load of dancers and models driving around London. We're all just chatting, and out of nowhere, Robin Thicke just starts going south of the border on one of the models. There was an awkward split-second silence, and then everyone just carried on and ignored it. Holy crap, I have a Robin Thicke story too. One of the administrative assistants at my work went to Vegas and met Robin Thicke there. He asked her at the bar if she wanted to come back to his room. When she said sure, he whipped out an NDA to have her sign. The guy cheated on his wife so much that he had paperwork drawn up so women couldn't tell on him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to drive limousine and taxi. One time I got the manager of a fairly famous Canadian band in my car asking me where to buy white snow. I had no idea where, and I told him that, so his bright idea was to find a working girl, hire her, and ask her. I told him I couldn't help him pick up working girls either. He was disappointed but understood. He had me drive down a well-known street until he saw a working girl. He asked me to pull over, got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and then immediately flagged me down as a new ride. I knew what was up, but whatever. He gets back into the car with the working girl and she tells him what house to go to for some white snow. I take them there and wait a bit. They come back out and I drive him back to the venue. Then he offers me 2 free tickets to the show, which I gladly accepted as I loved that band and I'd seen them 3 times. Alas, I was still working during the show. I gave them away to 2 friends who had never seen the band. They had a good time and I had a fun story to share with them about how I scored those tickets. Not really a shocking conversation and hardly a famous person, but it was interesting how easily and full of trust people can be about searching out and buying substances in a strange city. For the record, this was 2003. My dad was a chauffeur back when I was younger, and he told me a story of driving the director of a company down the road with the Blackpool illuminations in the company limousine. The director was standing up out of the sunroof with his arms out, waving at people as he drove past. What the people on the street didn't know is that in the back of the limo there were 2 working girls going to town on his eggplant. Out of all the answers, this is the one that made me go, aye, that sounds about right. Frickin' Blackpool. I have multiple people pay me handsomely to let them smoke green herb in the car. Heard a French guy yelling at his wife that $10,000 was too much to pay for 2 bracelets that she brought. Also overheard a lot of business deals with absurd amounts of money referenced, like tens of millions. I've had conversations at work where I've said, just buy 2 of the gosh darn things, it's only $25K. Kinda crazy to go from that to debating if I want to keep my HBO subscription that night. My sister was in a limo once and asked the driver about his most interesting ride. The driver said that he'd picked up some models who were going to a AITA demonstration. I'd rather be bare than in fur, or whatever it was. He got to the location, they stripped down in the back of the limo, and he waited until they were done with the photo op. You know, I guess if you're going to go and bare it all for the public and be photographed to boot, why not get trashed in a luxury stretch before you get there? Drove limo at Marquette University during undergrad and grad school. Some of the students that went there were obscenely wealthy. Limos are the vans that drive drunk students anywhere on campus and a few blocks outside of campus. A couple of things I remember randomly from it. 1, a drunk guy leaving his wallet on a van and another driver calling it so me and another supervisor could take it to campus police. We picked up the wallet from the driver and opened it to get the student ID so they know who to email. There had to be a few grand in there, and when we called the kid to tell him about it, he told us we could just keep it because it was too far from his dorm to bother picking it up. Okay. 2, I picked up a couple of girls from AITA and they spent the entire ride talking about how it was ridiculous that one of the girls' parents planned on making her pay for her own apartment after graduation, and there was nothing even livable under $2,000 a month. The school is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 3, Mardi Gras is the name of a campus ministry trip where you use your spring break to build houses and drink in somewhere that doesn't get snow in April. One of the people on my van was getting a free night of drinks from his buddies because he paid for everyone's trips. I think it was like $1,500 per person if I recall correctly. 4, it's a free service and a frat star tried to pay me for the ride with a Ziploc baggie of white snow. I said no and he called me a legend and left $20 in the cup holder before I realized it. 5, rich kids are rich, but foreign rich kids are usually on a different level. Was talking to a guy from Spain who said his dad did something with movies over there, I don't know. He had an actual Rolex on and ended the conversation with, "So anyways, do you know where to find any crystal? Rich foreign kids are crazy." I had a Russian friend and I'd always just generally assumed he was at our university in Scotland on some kind of scholarship. He seemed to only own one set of clothes, was the top of the math program, and drank a lot of vodka. He did once try to sell me a submarine when he was drunk, but that happens to the best of us. He seemed to fit in until his dad showed up and they flew to Paris for lunch. This is not a limo story, but this thread reminded me of a rich guy story. My daughter played soccer for many years, and at one practice, a guy drove up in a Ferrari, got out and started talking to another of the dads on the team. After a few minutes, the guy left and another of the dads went over there and asked him who that guy was. He replied that the guy was his lawyer or something. I came to find out years later that the guy in the Ferrari was a multimillionaire and had one and only one client, that dad, and his only job was to handle the dad's charitable donations. So this guy got filthy rich donating millions of dollars of someone else's money and taking a percentage off the top. The dad, who was apparently worth several $100 million, never came across as rich at all. He wore sweats to and was at every practice and game. He drove a Camry. He had been married to his average-looking wife for 25 years, stuff like that. Acted like a normal guy like the rest of us. One of my best friends used to drive Uber in a wealthy area of LA. He told me so many stories about drunk celebs and TikTokers in his car. Someone offered him a bag of green herb because they felt sorry for their friend throwing up in the back seat. Most people were just normal though. Some highlights: Quentin Tarantino and Trisha Paytas were baking out in his back seat when they were secretly dating. Mike Tyson is apparently very nice in person and also a giant pothead. Somebody on Gossip Girl and her friend were arguing about chicken nuggets and tried to get him to go through a Wendy's drive-thru during the lunch rush when there were already 10 cars in line. Addison Rae and one of her friends took their shoes off and left them in the car. Leo DiCaprio took more than 5 minutes to find the car. He seemed out of it and was quietly bobbing his head listening to music on his headphones. I had the distinguished privilege of working with a multimillionaire one time for a couple of days, and I was just astounded at how out of touch he was with people. One conversation, he was talking about how he hated all of the new homes they were building and liked old castles, so he was having a castle in Scotland disassembled and reassembled here in the US piece by piece. On another occasion, he asked me why I wasn't in college yet. The job was after high school and I was working as a plumber. And he gave an "oh, right," when I told him I couldn't afford to go yet and had to save up. About 25 years ago, I had a summer job at a very Tony country club. 6-figure joining fee, 5-figure continuing membership dues, and that got you nothing but the privilege of paying top dollar for rounds, food, and the other services. I was a porter some of the time as we had cottages on club grounds for members to stay and make a weekend out of it. One of my duties was driving members to and from airports, usually private airports for private jets. One time I'm driving 2 guys to the airport and one of them starts complaining. Seems he and his wife are always fighting over who gets the jet every weekend and where they want to go. Well, the other one replied, "My 3rd jet is actually just gathering dust right now since my son went to college. Take it off my hands?" They shook on it right there in the van. Very relatable. None of us know what to do with our extra jets once we've paid for a new building at Harvard to get our kid in there and he finally leaves. Good sweet Lord, can we please eat the rich yet? A small part of my family was Chicago Mafia. Grandpa told me a story of a family wedding in Chicago they went to in the late 60s. They were picked up at the airport by a limo with some high-ranking family members. On the way to the hotel, they were stopped about 8 times by various police officers. The officer would walk up to the driver's window. The chauffeur would reach into a money bag and pass a bill to the officer. Nothing would be said and they'd take off again. Eventually, my grandpa asked if they were being bribed. His cousin, the one in the mafia, laughed and said, "No, it's Thursday. That's when we pay our boys." So I guess that's how they did it. A traffic stop and in the open where it's not expected. So I'd imagine that chauffeur had seen some things. I used to caddy at a fairly exclusive country club in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a membership. You're either born into it or you marry a member. As a result, a lot of the members like to show off their influence by inviting guests who'd otherwise be unable to play at the club. Someone invited Mitt Romney. We were given a heads up that the governor, he wasn't a senator yet, would be coming and they wanted us to know how to act around him. We were told he wanted to be treated like anyone else, but they didn't want us to gawk. So I guess to make sure us dumb caddies weren't gawking, we were instructed to not look at or acknowledge the governor. Because this is precisely how we'd treat other people. I did get to shake his hand and chat a little bit. He was friendly, personable, way nicer than a lot of the members. I still don't like a lot of his politics, but he seemed nice enough in person. I was driving an Uber and I picked up 2 businessmen in an industrial park. They were building developers. The man who was clearly the boss spoke to me as if I were a man and I was always the driver who picked him up. Although they were clearly from the Middle East, they chose to speak English. Maybe they thought it was rude not to, being in the US, but if that would have been rude, I'm not sure what the rest of the conversation was. They spoke about the future of business as if it were all so futile, and how everyone will be either very wealthy like them or very poor, and how their children really won't be able to get jobs either, but they also won't need to. I logged more than 4,000 rides between 2015 and 2017, and that was one of the weirdest. The other weirdest guy I picked up from a dispensary. He was a really good-looking, very well-dressed and clearly well-to-do guy, but he was in some sort of mental distress. He wanted to visit more dispensaries but had clearly already bought the max. I got his hotel information through conversation and went there instead. On the way, he told me, in all seriousness, all about how his father was God, which meant he was Jesus. Didn't you notice how much brighter the sun became when I got in your car? He was serious. He also followed Guns N' Roses like they were the Grateful Dead. He thought Axl Rose was the smartest man alive. He didn't really notice when we got to his hotel instead of the dispensary. I did ask him if he had taken any other substances that day, and he insisted he hadn't. That was also one of the weirdest. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.